Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Natalie Haynes, an educator, registered psychotherapist, and speaker who brings a unique blend of experiences from both the corporate world and her work in mental health. Natalie has spent over 15 years in private practice guiding others through their mental health journeys, and she's known for creating safe spaces where real, uncomfortable conversations can happen, especially around topics like race, equity, and inclusion. In this episode, we'll explore the secrets behind Natalie's transformative journey, the struggles she's faced and helped others navigate, and the strategies she's developed to foster growth and understanding in both personal and professional settings. Whether you're looking to improve your mental health, engage in more meaningful conversations, or become a more inclusive leader, you're in the right place. So let's get started. Natalie, welcome to Life Without Secrets.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Really excited to have the conversation with you.
Right? I think this is going to be so much fun and such an important conversation in today's world. So, and to get started, though, I want to know more about your journey transitioning from a career in logistics and supply chain management to becoming a psychotherapist and educator. So, take us back to the beginning and share kind of what inspired you to have this significant career change and how that journey has kind of shaped who you are and what you do today.
Okay. Well, yeah. It is
Big question.
You know what, though? It is a lot of what I do now is because of my journey. And I worked in logistics and supply chain and, went all the way. I was in management by the time that I had left. And one of the things that, early on I knew was that I did not feel comfortable in my own skin, and I did not know why. And I was on a buying team, and my buying assistant, she said to me, "Have you ever thought about seeing a therapist?" And I was like, "I am not crazy." And she's like, "Call this person." And I said, "No, I am not calling this person." But because of, my trust in her and whatnot, I decided to do that. And what that first session did for me was open up to the idea that I was not broken, and that there was, that there was something more about how I had interpreted the world and what I'd experienced that shaped how I saw the world right now. And so, the more I sort of delved into it, and I mean, when I was working, I'd always have people sitting in my cubicle, and I loved working with teams. And on my performance appraisals, the feedback was always like, "Oh, she's a great people person, and really relational," and that sort of thing. And so it was just, when I saw the opportunity to actually start studying psychotherapy, I did. And so I was working, did psychotherapy school. Went to 2 different schools, and just kept working until I was able to start my practice. And I started my practice, had 2 babies, went to another school, and then I had started my practice, like basically jumped in full force. So I've been working with individuals, clients, couples, families. And I think, one of the biggest pieces for me in this work is that, and the kind of therapy that I've studied, primarily Gestalt therapy, is really understanding whatever it is that we experience as humans, but using myself as the learning tool. And so the more I come to know myself and all the different parts that make up who I am, and, can understand how those different parts came to be, why I think the way I think, how I walk into a room, how I, approach an emotional or vulnerable conversation. The more I look at myself, I have more compassion for all those different parts of me, and have more, it gives me a lot more, it allows me to see the other person. So really what I do is, I work with people to have them, experience themselves, experience what they're thinking, what they're feeling, the parts of themselves that they don't like, and really come to a place to understand, like, how did that part even come to be? How did my people pleaser self come to be? We tend to be like, "Oh, people pleaser, that's not good."
Yeah.
And, like, it's almost like there's a negative sort of spin on it, but that part of us came to be for a good reason. So
Mm.
I think it was like really this journey of me becoming a therapist was me, coming to a place of acceptance within myself and wanting to be able to do that for other people and so that you can find connection.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that so much. I feel very much the same in my own story as well. And, I think it's interesting, like the perspective that we, or the lens that we see the world through based on like the experiences we've had even earlier in our life
Yeah.
and how that affects, all of our relationships and how we view people. And, I too did that. And I would carry a lens of I don't matter. And I would
Mhm.
do the people pleasing to try to make myself feel I didn't matter as well. Right. I mean, it built strong relationships too. But in the end of the day, I never knew how I felt or what I needed in that environment. And so, doing the work is just so important. And I love the way that you put that. And I can totally relate as well. For those listening that don't know, like, what is psychotherapy? Never heard that word before. Can you kind of
Mhm.
just give like a little overview of what that is?
Yes. Psychotherapy is a, it's really a process for people to come to know themselves. So I would say counseling. I'm
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
therapist. And I, the way that I see psychotherapy is it's a process where people can actually just come to understand themselves. Like we don't have very many places where we can just explore who and how we are,
Mm-hmm.
and not worry about what the other person is going to say or do, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people say, well, why do I need to see a therapist? Like I have a friend, I can talk to my friends. But if you really think about it, when we're speaking to somebody that's in our life, we respond and we will share what we, will feel comfortable in order to keep the relationship like intact,
Yeah.
in order to stay in like connected.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing about, seeing someone that's a therapist is it's a place where you can, share the things that you may never ever say so that you can understand them for your own self. It's not about the therapist knowing what's right and what's wrong and what to do and what not to do, but really to create a space where, one of my therapists said this to me. She said, I feel like what we do is we hold the flashlight. And, so when someone's sharing something, I'll hear where someone might leave out a little part of the story or something that they might feel about it. And so I might just hold the flashlight and just say, point it to that dark spot and just say, well, what happened over there?
Mm.
And so once we look underneath, it's like, oh, right. I feel this way about that situation. Or I created, I have this thought about myself. Or oh gosh, I've always been a people pleaser because it's like boom, boom, boom. It's like, even though it's always been true, it's like sort of been in our unawareness.
Mm-hmm.
And so holding the flashlight in a really gentle way allows people to almost reclaim all of who they are,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and decide like, oh, now I know this thing about myself. What do I want to do with it?
Yeah.
Do I want to keep it or do I not want to? But at least I have the flexibility to make the choice. At
Yeah.
least I know. Right? So
Yeah.
that's a big piece about psychotherapy. And, my for your audience, like if that's something people are interested in understanding, why am I anxious in this situation, or why do I keep repeating this pattern?
Mm-hmm.
That piece is, that's what it's about. It's really to come to a place to understand you. It's not to go somewhere and have someone tell you whether or not you're, quote unquote crazy or not. We can
Yeah.
all use therapy, right? Like we can
Totally.
all, everybody, we can all, and so I think that, you know, taking that journey of self-discovery is a hard one. It can be scary and,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so worth it. It's so
Yeah.
worth it. Yeah.
So I would imagine, being that the work that you do, you are really great at creating kind of safe spaces for learning, for growth. Is there any kind of strategy that you use to kind of foster those safe environment and maybe in your workshops or in your practice? How do we develop more psychological safety in any place we're at, any conversation we're having?
Well, I think that the piece is actually to one of the places to start is with yourself.
Hmm.
You know, like, we when we're sitting and speaking with anyone, right? How I show up and how you show up, and it matters. And we create whatever space. Like, we're going to have this conversation, as even as I continue having this conversation, I'm becoming more and more excited, right? As because yeah, and so we're creating this because of who we are.
Hmm.
If I if I if I keep in mind how I might impact you, if I include all of who I am and understand how I'm contributing to this energy that we're creating between us, then I'm more aware of, like, of anything, of any impact. It's like, you said you were a trauma ER nurse.
Hmm.
If you walked into a room and you didn't look at the patient, you didn't acknowledge them, even though you're just walking in the room, that would have an impact
Hmm.
automatically. So owning how we show up with others is a way to create psychological safety, even if we get it wrong. Like, even if we say
Hmm.
the wrong thing, you know, but being open to, how did I impact you? And, being able to feel like, oh, I didn't mean that, or this is, and just to acknowledge our
Hmm.
impact. So I think the willingness to do that is the place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I think this is something big too, is like, when we're struggling mentally, it does impact our relationships,
Yeah.
and, not having an outlet for those secrets that you're keeping, for those feelings that you're holding on to that you don't actually know what it is you feel, you just know you feel bad.
Right.
They
Right.
impact our relationships and how we view the world.
That's
So,
right.
is there how can people start to open up and seek support if they feel like they're struggling mentally but feeling like closed off in wanting to talk about that?
Hard. That's a hard, it's a hard place to be,
Mhm.
because, what I find is that when people start to reach out, it's because one place feels more uncomfortable than the other.
Mm.
Like, whatever we may imagine, like, anxiety is a lot of our imagined future. What we're scared of is what's on the other side of what I'm about to say or what I'm
Mhm.
about to share. And really, a lot of it is like, what will the feedback be? Will there be judgment? Will I be disconnected from whoever it might be?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, because humans are all about connection, we will work in a lot of ways that we're unaware of in order to keep that connection. So when it comes to someone, with secrets, there's, part of keeping the secret is in order to maintain some kind of connection. But
Mm.
after some time, we're becoming more and more disconnected from our own self,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that becomes like, that's not how we're supposed to live. And so when we're able to, when that becomes more uncomfortable, then if people feel like, they can reach out and ask for support. And the
Mhm.
other thing is sometimes is to know that it's not always as bad as what we imagine it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can get through anything with some support.
Yeah.
Really and truly, we
It's
can
so
get through
true.
anything with support.
Yeah. What do you think
Hmm.
about like people who are struggling to kind of balance their own mental health needs um, with the demands of a relationship? So, clients who are trying to find balance without feeling guilty or neglecting either aspect, like a relationship, whether that's friend, family, business, and their own mental health, and trying to balance the two. Have you experienced that with clients?
Yeah, like, so do you mean like supporting
Yeah,
support?
like it's almost like they're trying to balance like their own needs versus another person's.
Oh, um, yeah. So there's a lot of times where, I mean, people will go through challenges where, there may be,
Mhm.
whether it's a child, or if you're a parent, um, or if you have a parent that is in a particular situation, and you're working through whatever. I mean, there's a lot, like, life is can be very complicated.
Yeah.
What I believe is that when someone comes in and they are dealing with whatever it is, a lot of times it's them actually being able to just be with how hard it might be, how much it might suck,
Mm-hmm.
um, the unfairness of it all, and feel heard in that place.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's not like sometimes there's nothing we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're just in a situation that's just hard. And so the more that we can actually connect with what we're feeling and what we're experiencing and tolerate of those emotions, because they like they show up physically. We physically
Mm-hmm.
feel our emotions.
Yeah.
The more that we can be with those, the easier it is to be with, whoever it might be,
Yeah. Honoring
you
both
know,
sides.
honoring both sides. And I
Yeah.
think, when we're in a place where someone else is struggling, we want to get into fix it mode, tell them what to do, tell them how to be, tell them, but nobody wants to be told what to do,
Yeah.
and especially nobody. However, they do want to have their experience validated.
Mm-hmm.
So starting with your own self to say, if you can validate your own feelings, and just allow them to be, you have more capacity to honor someone else's and to be with someone else's.
Yeah.
So that, though that's really hard, because being with our emotions we have a lot of different ways where we can avoid them.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Yeah.
very slippery ways. And I don't say that as a negative thing. It's actually better for us to know that it's happening and the reason it's happening.
Than to avoid it and withdraw from it altogether.
Well, even if we're avoiding something,
Mm-hmm.
to have the awareness that I am avoiding this because I do not want to feel this hard feeling is different than just, flipping on the TV and not looking and, noticing anybody for 8 hours or whatever it might be. But
Mm,
whatever someone might use to just avoid. But
okay.
do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Or like numb.
to numb. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I,
Yeah. That
yeah.
makes sense.
I, yeah. So if I have some awareness of the reason why I'm numbing out right now, that's even a little bit different than just plain old numbing out and not even knowing that it's happening,
Yeah.
not even being aware that it's happening. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good
So,
it's a good awareness to recognize and ask yourself, am I numbing? Am I asking myself the deeper questions to figure out more about what I'm doing, why I'm numbing myself or why I'm feeling this way?
yeah.
So, I also want to get into, so I think your signature program that you have is called the Comfortable Race Conversation Process. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is designed to help people have more like uncomfortable conversations about race. What do you think some of the biggest challenges people face in these conversations are? And do you have any suggestions to guide them through it?
Yeah. So, yeah, this program actually is created because of my own journey.
Yeah, please share.
So, yeah. So I remember I was 7 years old and I was having a birthday party, and I asked my mother, is this one girl should come into my party? And my mom said, no, she's probably not coming to your party because you're black. And I was like, I remember exactly where I was standing. I was standing by the window looking outside, and I remember being excited. And then I remember feeling confused, like, I'm black. I'm, and all of a sudden, my my skin became
Mhm.
almost like an entity,
Mm,
right? It it became I became aware of my skin,
mm,
and that my skin took on meaning in that moment. And what it meant was that, oh, there are going to be people who are not going to be, you know, want their, I won't be liked because of my skin color. And so, but I didn't know that. I was 7,
mhm.
right? So, and my mom didn't say it for any other reason other than to say, like, sometimes this is what the world can be like. So it was really, to protect me. However, psychologically, that my skin color took on a meaning, like in any,
Mm,
when it comes to any aspect of, our identity, so I asked my husband's white, and I said to him, so when did you learn that you were, when you were white? And he said, I didn't. He goes, but I did know that I was freckled. And I was like, you did?
Mm.
And he said, yeah. He said, some man came up to him and said, what happened? Did you get caught behind a screen door, like in front of the sun? And from that moment on, he hated his freckles
Mm.
because it's the psychological meaning that these aspects of ourselves take on.
Mm.
And so when it's unexplored or unexamined, it just sort of falls into the background of our awareness, like into our unconscious. Like, you think about an iceberg, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It just sort of falls down, and we don't know
Mhm.
until we bump up against it somewhere in life,
Yeah,
right?
you know what's so funny? I'm trying to think of like anything that applied to me, and I have brown eyes, and most blondes have like blue or green. And it's funny because
Mhm.
I remember like people always thinking I had green or blue eyes, and I would be like, why? And just because I was blonde hair. And when I met my husband, I met him on a vacation actually, and I went home and the first question I asked him was, what color are my eyes? Because that would tell me if he actually saw me.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that it's so interesting. So I'm
That's
like listening and
interesting.
I'm thinking, oh yeah, like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that, so I had a, and so as I grew up,
Mhm.
what I saw in the world, it almost justified this belief that I had about myself
Mm.
that I still didn't realize that I had. So, but that belief that I was not aware of changed how I showed up in the world.
Mm.
I didn't want to be Black. And
Mm.
that was hard. I could never have said that, 15 years ago out loud. Like, and I didn't know why.
Mm.
And so what I became aware of through doing therapy really was understanding that, oh, I have some secrets and
Mm.
feelings, and that I just know that I have something. And I just know, even when I think about race or think about having a conversation about race or thinking about talking about being Black, there's a part of me that would just want to shut it down. And I
Mm.
did not know why. Through the process of becoming a therapist, what I learned is that this discomfort that I had to do with how I felt about my own self.
Mm.
That psychological connection, to
Yeah.
so it's like,
So do you feel
someone
like the conversation would be different if you were at that moment proud of your skin and proud of being Black? And that you
definitely
would have showed up and that conversation would have looked totally different.
totally different.
So
My
give me
sister,
like an example of like what it's like or what it was like for you
yeah,
feeling like not proud to be Black, and then talk about how it feels well, and you can tell me how you feel now, but
yeah.
like what does the conversations look like? How are they different?
Well, I would say it would be things like, so for example, I remember, so my background is Jamaican, and
Mm. Mhm.
so we're pretty we're a multicultural, you know, island. There's primarily Black people, but there's also, a lot of different races. Anyway,
Mhm.
my father's very fair.
Mm.
And so I remember being little and wanting my dad to come and pick me up instead of my mom,
Mm.
or because I felt like if he would come to pick me up, then whoever I was with would see that I was different, right?
Mm.
And I think it was all a way to stay somewhat connected. So,
Mm.
if someone was talking about, um, you know, I don't know, my cousin she was talking about going to, if we'd go to a club or whatever when we were younger. And I
Mhm.
remember feeling like, I don't know why I don't want to do this as much as you do.
Mm.
And so a lot of my schooling and, growing up, I went to mostly an all white school, like, and I was, usually one of there was always a small number of Black kids because of the school that I went to. My
Mhm.
sisters, on the other hand, my sister, who's a year and a half younger than me, she was the one who was like, she was proud to be Black. Like, it wasn't something, she just embodied herself in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So she wasn't shrinking on the inside where I was, and I didn't know how to, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it was more about that shrinking on the inside. It wasn't that I didn't love the people in my family, and it didn't, it wasn't that.
Yeah.
I just didn't understand what was it about me that made me want to shrink from this being this part of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the big key. And seeing that my sister, who was younger than me, I knew she had a totally different relationship to this aspect of herself, and I didn't understand why.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how it would show up. And I felt like I couldn't be my full self, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
this is my, and so it's your identity, and it was my racial identity. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a solid racial identity because it was, a lot of it was unexplored. Now, I think that's the same for every one of us. Like,
Mm-hmm.
race isn't something that we can easily talk about. When creating my course, I talk
Mm-hmm.
to all different people of all different races, men, women, and, how do you feel about having a conversation about race? And people said the same thing. It's uncomfortable. I'm
Mm-hmm.
afraid to, someone's going to say the wrong thing, or I'm going to say the wrong thing, or they're going to say the wrong thing to me. It's going to be the worst thing in the world. It makes me anxious. And I'm like, wow, how are
Mm-hmm.
we ever going to find a way to create connection? How are we
Yeah.
ever going to find a way through if we can't even talk to each other?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I thought about this from a therapeutic perspective, it doesn't matter who's sitting in my chair. We are humans
Mm-hmm.
feeling something, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yep.
Right? Like, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. We're
Mm-mm.
just, because
Yeah.
that part of it, that's where we're the same. It's
Yeah.
just this, like, the casing that we have that makes
Mm-hmm.
us different, and what the world has told us about what this casing means, right? For each one of us.
Yeah.
And so because it's something that I believe has been largely unexplored, even from a psychoeducation perspective, there's a lot of people who need to, like, it's like, who can't embody all of who they are because of what the unconscious part that's unexplored. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, for example, like,
Yep.
I've had someone in my course who said, "Oh, you know, it makes me uncomfortable to be white." And I'm like, "But that's not okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not, that doesn't work."
Yeah.
Each one of us has to be able to embody all of who we are in relation to the other person, and understand what's the thing that makes me uncomfortable to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What it was, and that comes back to a lot of our earlier experiences, are the
Yeah.
stories we've been told, these little traumas that we've had that have been unexplored because there wasn't any place to actually have the conversation. I'll
Yeah.
use myself as an example. My mom didn't know that was all of a sudden, that's when I became conscious of what my skin meant,
Mm-hmm.
right? And, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of people of color and, racialized people who are like, who know when they were, like, know the time, know the moment when they
Wow.
realize, like, oh, my skin color means this. Whereas, my husband, I'll use him as an example. He's like, he didn't know.
Mm.
He didn't know he was white until he probably saw someone in where he lived, grew up, that was black, and was like, oh, that's different. So how do we come to how do we come to create meaning around that is also based on, what we've been told, what we see,
Mm-hmm.
what was on TV,
Yeah.
those pieces, right? It's like we create meaning out of these things that is really unawares.
Yeah.
So,
So if we're
yeah,
feeling uncomfortable, having that conversation around race,
yeah,
what are some things that we can do to feel more safe and feel like we can talk about it, feel like we can remove that kind of secret, right? Like that barrier from our connection.
yeah. So, for I think for every single one of us, first, it means, like, I know there's a lot of people that have done work around diversity and inclusion and belonging, and that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And as we can see in the world, we still have these places where people are really uncomfortable to have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want people to do is actually get really curious about their own relationship to their racial identity.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean when they think about being the race that they are? What are the thoughts and feelings and emotions, and just notice, what does it physically feel like? Does it make you want to shrink inside? Does it make you feel proud? Does it make you feel um, like, are there places where you might believe something but feel something different? It's like, oh
Yeah.
gosh, I've been taught this, and this is something that was said in my family, but I actually don't feel like this. Where does this show up in my life? Like, those are uncomfortable things to explore.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where the transformation is. Once we can become aware of this place where we might be uncomfortable, it's like shining the flashlight on that dark
Mm-hmm.
spot
Yeah.
and saying, "Oh geez, you know what? I remember, my parents used to say this. Ugh,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, I've secretly believed this for a really long time and I didn't mean that." It's
Mm-hmm.
just like me. I secretly shrunk inside and not wanting to be a black person, black woman,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know? And I think that that's the piece. You asked me a question, like, what does it mean for me to be now? Once we can explore once we can explore where the places I'm uncomfortable and basically take apart what was told to me and what meaning and beliefs did I create versus what's actually true,
Yeah.
right?
And
It's like, yeah,
And how
what's
important
actually
then
true.
in that moment, right? Like when you figure out what's actually true and you know that to be true about yourself and you show up to a relationship, what point of is it that it's so important that you share that truth and be vulnerable about it?
Well, can you say a little bit more about that? Like,
So,
yeah,
like I think like, it's one thing to kind of know like who you are and be, proud and confident and be able to approach a relationship about it.
yeah,
Is it something though that we need to then talk about um, or like put on the table or be vulnerable about in conversation? Or is it something like once we do the work in ourselves and we feel good about who we are and we uncover those, maybe the wounds or the
mhm,
truths about ourselves, but once we've done the work and we've gone, either to therapy, or got some help and diving into those a little bit deeper, is it just natural to show up to the relationship and be able to have just whatever conversation easier? Or is it something that we have to talk about in order to get past it with someone? Does that make sense? Like, is
yeah.
this
I
like
know,
a
I know what
me
you're saying.
problem? Or
Yeah,
is it, yeah, I'm trying to
yeah.
explain it in a way
No, I totally
that
get it. I
makes
totally get what you're
sense.
saying. Yeah. So I think it's been a we problem. And so
Okay.
people, right? It's been like, I
Mhm.
need to learn about this, this, this. I need to learn the right things to say, the right things to do, how to think about things. We have unconscious bias. Okay, I don't want to do that. I don't
Mhm.
want to say the wrong thing. Like, I think a lot of people want to do the work. And then, it's like, okay, I've learned all of these things. And then we try to have a conversation with someone. And every single person who's in front of us is a completely unique individual that will have a
Mhm.
completely different relationship to the concept of race,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yeah.
every woman is going to have a different way to express what womanhood is, but
Mhm.
collectively you know,
Yeah.
so when it comes to race, it's a let me do my own work. I need to do my own work and understand, like, okay, where's the places that I haven't explored? What are the beliefs and these things, and actually allow myself to feel what that is.
Mhm.
Because once I become more curious about my own self and I detach maybe the stereotypes and things that I've believed about, once I do that inner exploration, I become way more curious about the person who's in front of me. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter what doesn't matter what those things
Mhm.
are that we've been told to say and do. We can be curious about the person. It's the I think where people, it's like any relationship.
Mhm.
If I say the thing that I think I'm supposed to say,
Mhm.
I'm just trying to be a good person or a good, whatever. If I ask you about, what it is that is happening for you with me, that's a different conversation,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So I think people are trying to get it right. And in the trying to get it right and not really being curious about what's the reason I'm saying this or what's the reason I'm asking this question to this person who's in front of me, I'm going to miss them altogether,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
And
other
if we
thing I
don't
was
see that
thinking.
we're trying to be right, yeah, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
If we don't notice in
Mhm.
ourselves, like in our bodies, like, oh my gosh, I'm really trying to be right now with this person,
Mhm.
you know, you won't notice that you've missed them, but they will,
Yeah. Totally.
right?
And this
Yeah,
makes me think about like how our brains are pattern recognition systems. So
yeah,
like from our childhood, if like the moment you realize like, oh, like my skin makes me different and now you're like your brain is like now like assessing how you're different in situations, right? So once you do the work and start asking yourself those curious questions, like you're no longer approaching the situation looking for that same pattern, right? Like cuz your
right.
brain subconsciously will prove you right. So like
Absolutely.
if you're carrying around those things from your childhood, your brain is going to look for them to continue. And until you
That's right.
break the cycle, we can't actually get curious about like the other person because we're just proving in our brains right. Like that's all we're
Yeah,
doing when we're viewing our environment, right?
that's it.
Yeah.
It's all we're doing. We're not
Yeah.
ever being curious about who the person is in front of us.
Mm,
They just stay in whatever our brain, whatever story and belief was told and
yeah.
was created, whatever meaning was created.
Yeah.
So that's what the awareness is. The awareness
Yeah.
allows us to break what the brain will just naturally do.
Yeah.
You know, our
And
brain
it's
doesn't want us to be on that uncomfortable.
and like I think it's so beautiful. Right? Like to connection, like talking about connection, right? It's so beautiful when you can break that pattern within yourself and then like the connections you form after that point in your life, at least in my life, I've felt that as well. Um,
Hmm.
are so much more bonded, like we can have, conversations that might be uncomfortable to somebody else because they're viewing it from their old pattern. um,
Hmm.
we can have this conversation, for instance, and feel more connected. Like, oh, like
Absolutely.
I love learning about your story and I have compassion for where you've been. And I'm like proud of you for like where you are and also having this conversation. Like, I think it's a really good conversation. I think it's a really good way to see it too, because it's not like a me versus you or an us versus them. It's like this is about me and healing myself and then being able to show up and connect with others and get curious about people just for being
Yeah.
them too.
Yeah. 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 And I think being
So
able to
cool.
be with all of the feelings that come up when we are in places that
Hmm.
are and having conversations that we wouldn't typically have,
Yeah.
so that, it's like doing that emotional like workout, right?
Yes.
And lifting the
Hmm.
heavy weights. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't you
Yeah.
wish that like everybody could do the work? Like, I don't know. I feel like once I've done a lot of the work and really gotten curious about myself and dove into what I was carrying all these years and
Yeah.
it feels like you feel like you view the world differently and then you see people for like, oh man, now it's like, oh
Yeah.
man, I wish he could just go get some help and like really dive
Mm.
into that. It's like it's interesting
Yeah.
how you see the world. It's not like, and sometimes like people I'll see things and I'm like, well, that wasn't very nice, or like, that conversation didn't
Yeah.
go very well and you're like, oh, they really need to just do some work on themselves, but you can, like you can't really like say that necessarily. So is
Mm.
there anything you suggest if you're in a situation where like maybe it's your boss even, right? Like,
Yeah.
maybe it's in your relationship, who knows, where you're like, I really need to have this like difficult conversation, but that person you can see the pattern in their life and they
Yeah.
haven't done the work. How would you approach that relationship or that conversation?
Well, a lot of it would depend on the situation, and
Okay.
um, for sure, but I would say this, it would always start with exploring um, really exploring like what you're experiencing in that relationship, like how you feel, how it makes you feel, how you see the other person,
Mhm.
and um, and understand what's the thing that makes you like whatever that conversation may be about. Um, because one thing that we can't do is tell somebody
Right.
what to do, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, but we can tell them how they've impacted us.
Mm. Okay.
We can share the impact if it feels like it's safe to do.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, sometimes we're going to be in situations where someone else hasn't done the work.
Mhm.
And, sometimes when I'm going to say that when you do the work on yourself and
Mhm.
know this is what I'm feeling about this is what makes me uncomfortable. This is what we can't change somebody else, but we can change how we show up with
Mhm.
someone else.
Yeah.
And the moment that we do that, the relationship changes.
That's beautifully said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
One last question just for um, like leaders and businesses and stuff like that. I was thinking like, is there any struggles in particular you see that leaders commonly face when trying to create more inclusive environments? And is there anything you suggest in that situation?
Well, when we are in a, we're in a global economy, we're in a
Mhm.
diverse world,
Mhm.
and so creating there's like the evidence that organizations that are more diverse are um, do better
Mhm.
because I gotta tickle my throat
I know.
because
It's okay.
it's exactly what you said. When you talked about the brain pattern recognition,
Yeah.
if you've got all the same people whose brains work the same way because they've had similar experiences, they're going to see the same thing, but they're not going to see what might be in the background that someone else can see,
Mm. Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So having a diverse organization, group, whatever it might be, allows an organization to see the whole picture of whatever strategy they're looking at, whatever plan they're trying to implement. And so in order for a leader to actually create inclusive environments, they have to start with including and learning how to include all these different aspects of themselves.
Mm.
And so leaders understanding like, what's my relationship to race?
Yeah.
How do I talk about this? What happens when I want to ask somebody about, something about an aspect of their racial identity? Do I feel nervous? Do I feel uncomfortable? Do I feel like it's okay? How do people respond to me?
Mm. Mhm.
Right? Like
Mhm.
looking at and asking, how do people actually respond to me? And so that self inquiry is the place to start because
Mm.
once you do, then you have a better chance of, like we talked about at the beginning, creating that psychologically safe space.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, as a trauma nurse, like you knew how you had to show up in the room,
Mm.
especially with people that are in, you
Yeah.
know, terrible situations
Yeah.
because it has
Mhm.
an impact. So if you're not aware of how you're showing up, you won't be aware of you'll miss the thing that you don't even see. It's like
Yeah.
you don't know what you don't know. So you have to look at this part of us, this we're all something. We were all told we were a race.
Mhm.
What is the meaning that I have associated with my own? Because once I know that, then I know how I see the world and how I see other people, right?
So good.
It's yeah, what have I integrated? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if you're going to mention this, but I have a Udemy course. It's like a 2 hour version um, of my bigger course
Oh,
that it's on Udemy. So,
okay.
and it's specifically geared to leaders.
Well,
Yeah.
how can people find your courses and more about you from here?
Well, they can, look at the links. They can use the links to the course. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Go right ahead.
I'm
Hmm.
super proud of it.
Yeah.
So the comfortable race conversation process. So I've run it 2 or 3 times a year. It is 7 weeks and it's comprised of online modules and for 6 weeks, a 90-minute workshop facilitated by myself where I create a psychologically safe place. And everybody in that group, like you would explore your own relationship, your own racial identity, your relationship to race, while other people are doing the same. And I provide the psychoeducation that I believe we all need around, you know, even like going into a breakout session and noticing what am I experiencing right now as I go into that breakout session. Once everybody talks about how they've experienced it, like, can I give you a quick example? I'll
Yeah,
give you a quick
please.
example after.
Yeah, please do.
So once we've done that, by the time that we're done the 6 weeks or the 7 weeks, sorry, everyone has been talking about race the whole time. So by the time we're done and we've explored all these different concepts using ourselves as the tool, guess what? People are not afraid to have a conversation about race and transform their relationship to race. It's like they can own themselves.
That's
And
so
that's what
cool.
we all need to do as humans. Yeah.
That's
And
so
sorry,
beautiful.
I was going to say, yeah. So I did this once for an organization, and there was an HR director in the room, and asked, everyone this question, like, can you talk about a time or think of a memory when you got it wrong with someone?
Mm-hmm.
And so they went into the breakout sessions, and then they came back to a larger group, and so this person, shared when they had got it wrong, with another aspect of like someone's sexual orientation or something. So whatever it was, but the important piece is that this HR person, director, said, I was really afraid to say what I wanted to say because I was in a group with someone who had just started in
Mm.
the organization and decided that they were going to share anyway. And so once they did, the this the other person said, "Oh, wow, you know what? Since you've shared, I feel like you were so much more approachable because this person also shared something where they'd gotten it wrong with someone, or they'd
Mm.
missed somebody."
Mm-hmm.
And so that, we all will make missteps, right? But I think it's finding the places where, it's like our vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're the same, you
Yeah.
know? Our shame around our vulnerability, that's where we're the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this was obviously more at the end of the program, but I think it's just starting with, yourself, and having people actually all have this conversation creates a place where people can learn how to have conversations with
And feel
different
safe.
and feel safe. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that so
Yeah.
much. Well, this has just been a beautiful conversation with you. I'm super
Yeah.
excited and so excited that you came on today and that we got to do this together. So, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom, your vulnerability, and all your strategies with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I think what you do is going to truly make a difference. And I know I've gained from this conversation. I know our listeners have too. So, thank you, really, honestly.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
to
thank you so
everyone,
much.
yeah, of course. To everyone listening, if you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit from these insights. You're going to find some links in the show notes from Natalie. So go ahead and check those out. And remember, growth comes from embracing the uncomfortable and supporting each other along the way. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep living your truth. I'm Jillian Riddell, and this is Life Without Secrets. Hey there, it's Jillian from Life Without Secrets. Ever feel like you and your partner aren't quite on the same page? Well, you're not alone, and that's exactly why I created our latest issue of Truthful magazine. It's packed with insights and stories about bridging that gap and finding a deeper connection. We're diving into real conversations about needs, feelings, and how honest dialogue can rekindle that closeness that you've been missing. Why not explore this together? Go grab your free copy right now at lifewithoutsecrets.com and turn those pages into shared moments. Can't wait for you to dive in and share your thoughts with me.